Inhabitants of the land of the
Welcome to another episode of the IFC's Individuation podcast. I'm Dr. Lahab Al-Samarrai, and with me today is the usual wrecking crew. Lisa Hong is with us, and Eric Tomlinson is with us. We usually call them doctors. Today, we're just calling them Lisa and Eric. Today, we are back. Last week, we did not have podcast, and we apologize. We took a week off. We usually are not that lazy. We never take a week off, but we took a week off. So I have to admit that because other people have been asking and I have to admit the truth. Lisa, Eric, would you like to say hello to our listeners?
Hi, everyone.
greetings, loved ones.
Welcome back.
Now you know why I call them Lisa and Eric. Okay, so with that, today's chapter, The Inhabitants of the Land of the Spirits. I hope you're enjoying this series with us because Mary Louise von Franz has taken us through a journey. And our journey started early on in in chapter 1, The Indefinite Place. And then we moved to chapter 2, which was the moon. Then we move to chapter 3, the hole in the earth, the sky hole and the cave. In chapter 4, we move to the well. Chapter 5, the water. And chapter 6, the island. Chapter 7, the end of the world. And chapter 8, the clashing rocks. And chapter 9, the mountain. And chapter 10, the upper and the underworld. The timeless realm, and now the realm of the dead and the spirit world, and now the inhabitants of the land of the spirits. So she has taken us through a journey of different motifs in regards to fairy tales. What happens in fairy tales, how we end in the fairy tale, what the fairy tale is like. The first thing we've understood from this long discussion is that the fairy tale is like a dream. And the journey starts is when we close our eyes, when we go to that place. So today there's a twist. It's when we go to that place, but there's another place that they call the inhabitants that inhabits the world of the dead. So in different traditions and different native stories, they have this story about inhabitants of this land of the spirits. So how can you get into the land of spirits? How can you leave? In Greek mythology, we use the term, we've talked about Hades and the underworld. And now we are in the inhabitants of the land of the spirits. So what happens to the people who are stuck in the land of the spirits? And can we enter the land of the spirits and return from the land of spirits in terms of fairy tales? So why don't we start by talking about what our thoughts were about what we read this week. Eric, if you want to comment, Lisa.
On the fairy tale that, am I going to read it tonight?
No, I'm just, I'm just asking about the inhabitants of the land of the spirits. What was the feeling or thought?
Or I see what just
like
a general thought.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, it to me, and I read every story in this chapter, but to me, it just the one common theme. There are several, but one common theme that stuck out to me is the back and forth that what we call the normal, real, physical world and the spiritual world, how the unconscious, our unconsciousness is kind of maybe a small gateway, but it's still a gateway for us to be connected with the other side. If I can say it, I don't know if I can say it any better than that. It's probably not greatly said, but I'm just going to my basic feeling on what I felt. And it's, damn, this unconscious mind really gives us insight into spiritual energy, into the spiritual realm, into what we're not physically living in right now. That's the thought that I got, Dr. Lahab.
Lisa, any thoughts on?
The themes that I was thinking about were thinking about how our unconscious will manifest our desires, and that there's always a sacrifice to be paid for those desires, or maybe a sacrifice for transformation to occur. And in between these realms, when we go into the unconscious, there is still a price to be paid.
That was another really big point. Thank you, Lisa. That was good.
There.
So when we look at this is the new aspect of the unconscious as the land of the dead, and souls appear for the first time. So suddenly there's a different layer to the unconscious. And that's what Van Franz starts talking about today. And so each different entrance into the unconscious, like different doorways, going into a similar realm, is you enter the unconscious, but you enter at different levels. And this level is the land of the dead, and the souls appear for the first time. And this is the motif where the land of the dead and the spirits, they appear, you're in a different place. And this is a very tricky place because you might end up being stuck there, which means that even if you come back to consciousness, somehow you end up dying in the end. So this doorway is kind of a tricky doorway. It's one of those doorways that we worry about entering. So today, Eric is going to read a fairy tale, and then we're going to discuss it as always, but we're going to hear this motif coming of going somewhere where we're not supposed to be, and then trying to leave that place. So Eric, why don't you?
Yes. And then, as Lisa said, paying a price for which way we go.
Yes.
I thought, yeah, that was really good. I'm going to read a fairy tale called A Hunter in Hades. It's a Aniyu group of people, and one of my side things that I love to do is read about historical anthropology. I love going all the way back to the first groups of people that we have record of and can surmise about, and then how basically the original aborigines of this planet, where they started and how they spread before they started intermixing. And it's just a fascinating story. This people is reminiscent of, in fact, in many ways is a modern day Aboriginal group. We only really see that in locations that have been isolated for a long time. Same way we see evolution of animals on this planet over tens of thousands of years. Were they isolated? Were they intermingling? And these great periods of or places of isolation, people don't evolve that much. The genetics don't evolve as much. Civilization and human interaction do something to create an evolvement of human beings.
It's a self-sustaining wheel.
Yeah, and so, pardon?
The self-sustaining wheel.
It is. Now, so these people are the Japanese.
Why don't we get into the fairy tale? And we'll talk about, yeah.
Okay. One day, a handsome and brave young man who was skillful in the chase pursued a large bear into the recesses of the mountains. On and on ran the bear, and still the young fellow pursued it, up heights and crags more and more dangerous, but without ever being able to get near enough to shoot it with his poisoned arrows. At last, on a bleak mountain summit, the bear disappeared down a hole in the ground. The young man followed the bear. He found himself in an immense cavern, at the far end of which was a gleam of light. Towards this he groped his way, and on emerging, found himself in another world. Everything there was as in the world of men, but more beautiful. There were trees, houses, villages, and human beings. With these, however, the young hunter had no concern. What he wanted was his bear that had totally disappeared. The best plan seemed to be to seek in the remote mountains district of this new underground world. So he followed a valley upwards, and being tired and hungry, he picked some grapes and mulberries that were hanging on the trees and ate them as he trudged along. Suddenly, for some reason or other, he happened to look down upon his own body. To his horror, he found himself transformed into a serpent. On making the discovery, his cries and groans were turned into serpents' hisses. What was he to do? To go back like this to his native world, where snakes are hated, would be certain death. No plan presented itself to his mind, but unconsciously he wandered, or rather crept and glided, back to the entrance of the cavern that led home to the world of men. And there, at the foot of a pine tree of extraordinary size and height, he fell asleep. In a dream, the goddess of the pine tree appeared to him and said, "I am sorry to see you in this state. Why did you eat of the poisonous fruits of Hades? The only thing you can do to recover your proper shape is to climb to the top of this pine tree and fling yourself down. Then you may perhaps become a human being again." Upon waking from this dream, the young man, or rather the snake, was filled half with hope and half with fear. But he resolved to follow the goddess's advice. So he slithered up the tall pine tree, and when he reached its topmost branch, after hesitating a few moments, he flung himself down. On coming to his senses, he found himself standing at the foot of the tree. Close by was the body of an immense serpent, ripped open so as to allow somebody to crawl out of it. After offering up thanks to the pine tree and setting up objects of reverence in her honor, he quickly retraced his steps through the long tunnel-like cavern through which he had originally entered Hades. After walking for a certain time, he emerged into the world of men to find himself on the mountaintop, whether he had pursued the bear, which he had never seen again. And on reaching his home, he went to bed and dreamt a second time. The same goddess of the pine tree appeared before him and said, "I have come to tell you that you cannot stay long in the world of men after once eating the grapes and mulberries of Hades. There is a goddess in Hades who wishes to marry you. It was she who, assuming the form of a bear, lured you into the cavern and thence to the underworld. You must make up your mind to come away." And so it turned out. The young man awoke, but a grave sickness overpowered him. A few days later, he went a second time to Hades and returned no more to the land of the living.
Okay. Go ahead, Eric. Finish your story.
Oh, just real quick. These people lived on an isolated island off Japan, and about 800 AD, they became, I'm sorry, about 12, was it about, no, about 800 AD, they started becoming infiltrated from that century on. They lived on an island called Yeto, right off Japan. And the emperor of China even thought these people were a curiosity because they were called hairy men. And they had, and their remains even show flattened arm and leg bones, which indicates that these people are really old. These are really aborigines that went to an island and kind of was left alone for centuries, for hundreds of years.
Mhm.
And even though they're that close to, much closer to the origin of man than most people we think of during 800 AD,
Who do you think of when you think of 800 AD?
It depends. Are we talking about major metropolitan areas like in Asia and China? Then we're talking about relatively modern looking and thinking men. But if we're talking about people who have been living on islands for centuries and centuries, then we're talking about people who are relatively still primitive. And these people, even though primitive as they were still known for wanting to know the origin of things. And that's why I always love seeing this with people that are this old, because you get to see, we can't think like they do anymore about the spirit world. We've got too many distractions. But these people, they had long, toilsome, tough lives throughout the years that they lived. And their thinking was a lot more related to the earth and to the spiritual aspect of existence and energy. They didn't understand it the way we do now, but they felt it keenly. And that's the people who are giving us this fairy tale, which I found fascinating with that background. Does that make sense, Dr. Lahab?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I mean, I found it fascinating. I think there are several aspects to this fairy tale. One of the aspects is that once he eats of the fruit, he's stuck. There's no way out. But it's also a dream telling him that he's dead or dying. So you could look at it as a premonition dream where it's telling you this is your future. You are already in the land of Hades. It's kind of a preparation dream. I'm getting you ready. I'm preparing you for the journey. And part of the journey is that you're trying to escape from death. And then you wake up to figure out that you're really sick and dying. Yeah. And that's how it's seen. So
that's a really good point, Dr. Lahab. And if I can just attach something else to it,
sure,
is that and this happens to a lot of people when they get close to dying, their body gives up. This is a phrase that I grew up hearing. Their body tends to give up the ghost before their mind does. And we see that here because his body's eating fruit. And it's poisonous fruit from Hades, but his mind isn't there yet. His body is saying, I'm headed in that direction, whether you're going or not.
Yeah.
There's that aspect, I think, to that point. And
well, that's why I think it's like the premonition that you are going to be somewhere else, that you are already there. I think of us as already there. Like we've already been through this kind of timeline. We've already done this. So it feels old at a certain point. But when a premonition comes, it's very clear. And the crypticness, especially something like that, is gone away right away. A lot of people with major illness will tell you how they had a premonition about the major illness hitting them before it did.
That's true.
They'll usually talk about a dream. They'll talk about an incident. They'll talk about fainting or feeling physically tired, and that they knew something was deeply wrong, but they didn't know how they knew. So it's a heads up, right? So this is where our connection, Lisa, between us and this other world, that doorway doesn't seem so secure. Like information starts to flow back and forth.
Wow, well said.
And that's always been, and the closer you are to that. One of the things that they talked about was what happens to people who can't come to terms with it. They keep roaming the underworld.
Oh,
dead,
very good.
But they can't come to terms that they're dead. So they keep arguing the point that, no, they're not dead. and that they want to return. So, you know, how many years have gone by? In one of the stories, turns out that the person was gone for 300 years, comes back and says, well, you were old. He goes, no, I've never heard these stories. These stories come from a long time ago. And he's like, and as he looked at him, he turns into ash and disappears. And that's like a spirit that's stuck, that can't seem to leave, can't seem to depart, can't seem to move on. And so that comes from the spirit world and an energy. So of course, what is that energy? It's a complex, right? And it's the complex of survival. So we have this complex, it's called survival. And it's a hard nut to crack, as we've seen in the movies. Survival is something that we have worked tirelessly. If we have done anything else on this planet besides multiply, is survival. And so we've turned it into this art form of how what they talk about is like cheating death, but you can't really cheat death. You're just buying time. And it just means your time hasn't come yet. But survival, the complex, and these are complexes, right? So the complex is that, no, it's not your time. I'll tell you when it's your time. Only I can tell you when it's your time. It's not your time. So therefore, you're stuck on the planet because it's not your time. So you're not ready to go, right? Yeah, I'm not ready to go. So, okay, then we're not going, right? Well, okay, we're not going, but you know, the ticket has already been cut. The train has already left the station. You are already on the other side of the world. But you are still arguing the same point, which is the complex arguing the point, which becomes a spirit, right? So the complex splits off as a spirit. So here they talk about something interesting that they introduced that was kind of new, not really, but like, so Jung would say that we have many souls, but we have one spirit, which I found fascinating. There's a new twist. So these several souls end up dying, and then they become a spirit. They transition to the spirit. Some of the souls do not.
Are these souls reflections of our complexes?
I think they are complexes. I think that's what he was talking about.
One thing that you helped me to see by what you just explained is that this fairy tale shows that there's a whole spectrum of there's an entire spectrum, you know, consisting of complexes that react differently to death.
Yes.
And it shows two very distinct, and you brought up the second one, which was, I thought was great. There's two very distinct ways on the surface that you can look at this story. But then when you go deeper, oh my gosh, this is a story, just fill in the different complex. There's many ways that people can respond to this.
Yes, well, the complex is saying, I am not going. I'm not going to go. You want to go, I'm not going to go.
And our body and mind can be separated or closer together in a variety of numbers of ways. And this shows that. That was pretty fascinating to me.
She says, in particular, insofar as the unconscious is represented, this on page 117, much effort, in particular, insofar as the unconscious is represented as the realm of the dead, the danger exists to a large extent also for those more cultured people who cannot withstand the fascination of the unconscious. Okay. So whether you come from the original societies or the original group that inhabited a place, or you're the escalation of the original group and a new variation of a Givenchy suit, you you can fall into the same trap.
Yes. We have
Both
thousands
you
of
are
years of
fascinated by the other side.
we have thousands of years of history to show that, don't we? That's great.
Always
Great point.
fascinated by the other side.
Yes.
So now I think we do like try to freeze the body or cut the head or freeze the brain or freeze a part, or like they have cryogenics, or they've tried different things. But she says, once we identify the magical realm with the kingdom of the dead and spirit land and assume it's a symbol of the unconscious, it follows the content. So it's a symbol of the unconscious. Okay. It follows that the contents of the land of the spirits represent psychological facts. According to Jung's view, the primitive people's belief in spirits based on their naive perception of spiritual process. He based his conviction concerning the existence of spirit to a large extent on dreams, visions, and his observations of psychogenic illness, in particular with hallucination and psychic phenomena related to states of possession. Spirits are, in the sense, not only ghosts of the dead, Jung writes. Spirits, therefore, viewed from the psychological angle, are unconscious autonomous complexes, which appear as projections because they have no direct association with the ego. Also, spirits are complexes of the collective unconscious, which appear when the individual loses his or her adaptation to reality, or which seeks to replace the inadequate attitude of a whole people by a new one. Jung writes further, this is a quote, "It's impossible to speak of the belief in spirits without the same time considering the belief in souls. Belief in souls is a correlate to belief in spirits, since according to primitive people, a spirit is usually the ghost of one who is dead. It must once have been the soul of a living person. This is particularly the case wherever the belief is held that people have only one soul, but the assumption does not prevail everywhere. It's frequently supposed that people have two or more souls, one of which survives death and is immortal. In this case, the spirit of the dead is only one of several souls of the living, is thus only a part of the total soul, a psychic fragment, so to speak. The fact that we are completely unconscious of the existence of these different parts souls and their strangeness, uniqueness, uncanniness, and combined with the above mentioned power of attraction on the ego that are so characteristic of the otherworld dimension could explain the disastrous, alluring effects of the spirit and why the living seem to be pulled into the realm of the dead." So when he talks of the complexes, he talks of, because the complexes are autonomous and they're eternal. They don't die. They're energy. So this would make perfect sense with Jung's overall theory. The complexes don't die. But that means that if you have lived a long life, you might have different souls. Different parts of you are going to go to different places. One part of you is going to die. And the complex is going to argue. One part of you is going to be immortal. That's the archetype. So this is what we're talking about, archetypal thinking, is the energy. The energy survives, right? So the complex is energy. So the energy, this configuration of energy survives with the feeling tone. A feeling tone is a way of perceiving and relating to the world. It continues.
That energy has that information stored within it, is what I
Correct.
think you're saying.
Correct. Well, it's eternal.
Yeah.
So it's been through time.
And quantum theory basically supports that.
Yes. Yes, quantum theory, actually. Thank you for reminding me, Eric. I had This is a really good book. It's called The Quantum Revelation by Paul Levy. In this book, he makes beautiful points. He makes several amazing points, but I wanted to just read a quote from page 228. And he says, quantum physics indicates, so we're still talking about fairy tales, right? We're talking about spirits, we're talking about complexes, so nobody goes, oh my God, where are these guys going? Okay. Quantum physics indicates that our universe is arising exactly as a dream arises, as an immediate, unmeditated reflection of the observing consciousness. It should therefore not be surprising that there is similarity with other wisdom traditions that also are creatively articulating and illuminating the dreamlike nature of our universe. For example, one of the most succinct teachings of the Tibetan Buddhism describing the dreamlike nature of reality, while at the same time being an expression of the very dreamlike nature it is pointing out, can be essentialized in four words: as viewed, so appears. As viewed, so appears can be thought of as an equation of formulation for how we concrete reality within this dreamlike universe of ours. And then he goes on. So I don't want to lose everybody, but I'll stop there.
If I can ask a quick question to that reading, though,
Yeah.
and to this concept.
Yes.
Is it saying, this is what I think it's saying, but I could be wrong. Is it saying that the energy that created us as individuals,
Yes.
that energy that created us, however way you want to envision that, that energy had information contained within it before we were even created?
Yes. It had the blueprint. It's already
That's
there.
what I thought.
It
Yes.
already existed. It's already playing itself out.
That's
Then,
what I thought.
and then,
So we're affected by it.
yes. And to follow that up, Eric, that's a great point. To follow that up, on page 229, he says, in a dream, our inner process projects seemingly outside of ourselves so as to be experienced and encountered as though it objectively exists. This process helps us get in touch with the unconscious part of the subject, ourselves.
That's almost funny. That's almost a funny statement.
Yeah. So
because on one hand it sounds silly, but on in the one hand it sounds silly.
Have to dream us. When we dream us, then we see us.
And on the one hand, that can sound silly, but my God, it's just so real.
Well, you know, this is the fascinating thing about quantum theory and how when we look at depth psychology and when we think of Jungian psychology, we look at quantum theory and how it backs up what Jung was saying.
Yes, it does.
It backs up that there are complexes. It backs up there are archetypal structures. It backs up what, Eric, you alluded to, your statement of the script is already there. We just haven't read it. Although we are the lead actors in the play.
And that script that's in that energy already, I'm not saying it's all archetypal, but it certainly contains a lot of archetypes.
Well, it is all archetypal because it's all the energy that projects out the existence. As the energy, if we think of the energy as, if we think of the different parts of the archetype that make the bigger picture, that let us see into things that we couldn't imagine. Yeah. That let us make statements like, we dream about who we are. To make statements like that, you have had to have seen it and be able for it to tell you that it saw you. The dream does that. What the dream does so beautifully is it tells you, hey, I see you. Guess what you're doing? And sometimes the time that we freak out in the dream is when we're being seen. Oh shit, this is about me. Let me get the fuck out of here. I don't want to be here. Get me out of here. That's how it changes us. It's like, oh, well, wait a minute. I could have swore I was being watched, but it wasn't me. Okay, but who was it, right?
I think, Dr. Lahab, in addition to all of that learned information that is in that energy that is described as archetypes, I think there's also, I don't know what one would call this, but I think there's also the same kind of energy that's related to automatic responses that our body has.
Well, I think that's just another complex.
Really?
I think that there's a regulation complex. I think there's a part that regulates us.
I never thought about it in that way.
That makes sense out of the way we do things, and it says, okay, well, your body can tolerate this, but it can't tolerate that.
You know what?
That's the part of you always talking to is like,
you need to stop.
Should I do that? Should I eat that pizza?
Yeah, but Lahab, you need to stop coming up with these damn things because
what is that? Are they coming up with themselves? I don't think I'm identifying what.
I'm joking to our listeners, but damn, that was excellent.
Well, this is what I think they are identifying us. They're calling us out. They are. They're saying, "Oh, have you seen me? I don't know you, sir. Who are you? Oh, I regulate shit."
That was good, wasn't it, Lisa?
Yeah, that was made me think of Zen Buddhist monks who are able to withstand and kind of self-regulate in extreme situations where maybe they have like really are tuned in with all of their complexes and are able to flow within a broader dynamic range.
That's great, good point, because related to that particular complex, they've learned to live with it, to understand its meaning, and to feel the impact of it. Whereas the average person who has not studied that and lived it like they have, they can only understand it intellectually to a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
that was a great point.
They understand it as a alarm system.
Yeah,
they understand it
limiting factor.
I'm not doing okay. Something is wrong with me. They don't understand it as a system that is conscious. And I think that's what we miss with the complexes. The complexes are conscious of us.
Man.
They're conscious of what we are doing.
I'm going to have to listen. I'm going to have to listen to this one again. Can I listen to this podcast a second time?
Sure. We would like all of our listeners to,
because this is some good stuff.
So if we think about it, is that
you laugh at me.
The complex is the complex is conscious of what we are doing in the world. But the complex is also in charge of relating. So the complex will speak to you. Should you be eating that? Why does that look good to you? Remember what happened last time? Where is that voice coming from? What is it? A memory? What is it? An echo? Who is talking to you at this point? That's your regulating complex. That's the complex that's saying, hey, that's gonna fucking kill you. Don't eat it. Are you sure you want to have that other drink? That's the complex. It's telling you your system is overloaded. Your system is about to crash. Are you sure you want to go in there? You don't look like you're ready. Are you sure you don't want to go somewhere else? Right? So when you're in tune with it, you are healthier because then you like cut things out that make you sick. You're like, no, I don't eat that because that makes me sick. Oh, no, I'm good with this. And so you see people who are finally tuned in, and they're tuned into who they are and how they operate. And so usually, people look at them as like, oh, you're on a health kick or something. No, actually, they're just in tune with the complex. They're in tune. They're listening to the complex. The complex says, oh, I would never put that in my mouth. Those who are not in tune with their complex, they look at a donut and say, oh my God, look at that, sugar. Ah. The other part of you is like, oh, this is not going to end well.
So does this mean that complexes are not either good or bad?
They're not.
Because what you've just described is a positive effect of a complex.
Yeah, they're not there. They're there as they're there that are eternal entities that have existed before time. They're trying to make sense out of your existence in a very brief time.
Now, a person accomplishing what you just stated, would we say that they are achieving, at least on some level, that, you know, they're achieving wholeness?
In the case when you are more open and integrating your complexes, when you're working through your complexes, you're integrating these pieces that are arguing against each other. Now you have a round table and everybody's talking to each other. They might still flare up, but they sit at one table and you see all of them. They don't sneak up on you. They don't turn you into this mad dictator overnight. But most of the day, you know, you take orders from little kids. Who is this person who comes out at night? Well, that's the complex. It's not you. And the more you're identified with pieces of you, the crazier you are. You know why people is like somebody, you look at somebody and they say, oh, I'm crazy. I do all these crazy things. They're identifying their complexes. They're telling you which pieces of them are free floating. Just because people don't identify their complexes doesn't mean that the pieces of them are not free floating. That just means they're dissociated most of the time. So there's a very clear understanding when you go into and when you work with people with mental illness, there's a very clear understanding of all the broken glass. There's broken glass everywhere. They see the complexes, they see the power structures sitting there, but they feel they have no connection to them. The more they have very little to no connection to the complexes, the more your internal world is rife with chaos.
Yes.
Because then it's like pieces of you are arguing as you and everything else.
I can think of so many examples where I've done that in my life.
Yeah, so you're arguing with yourself, you're questioning yourself, you're not liking yourself, you're second guessing yourself, you're not moving in the direction that you usually move, which is forward. You're not trying to do it. You're bogged down, basically.
And during the time periods where I did that consistently, it led to feelings of low self-worth, like I wasn't worth anything, like I didn't deserve anything, nothing good was going to happen. And most importantly, that there must be something just inherently wrong with me and my existence.
Yeah, the voices become to the point where you start to question your sanity.
Yes.
You start to say to yourself, it's like, I'm fucking crazy. I can't stop thinking about all these things. It's not thinking. You're not thinking about them. They're talking to you.
Yes. You're listening to them.
We say we're thinking about things, but it's not true. We lie.
We're listening to it.
You sound crazy if you say you're thinking about stuff. It sounds sane. But if you say, I'm listening to my inner voices, it sounds a little crazy. So we don't say that. We say, oh, I'm thinking about stuff that's making my life difficult. No, I'm thinking. You're having like drag out brawls in your internal sphere that basically it's a cage fight. Basically, it's like you come out with an arm dislocated, a head that's been shattered a couple of times. Anyway,
but you're smiling, Lisa. Do you agree?
I'm thinking, have you been reading my diary?
Oh God. Oh gosh. I'm
Speaking
gonna
of
send
Lisa's diary, I wanted to talk about one of her dreams. No, just
I'm gonna send her a present for that.
no, but this is what happens, right? So that the complexes show up in our dreams. And when the complexes show up in our dreams, they show up as this very kind of strange pact. People who are intimidating, people who are angry, people who are controlling. So some of those we acknowledge right away. We know who they are, right? We talk about the anima, we talk about the ego, we talk about the shadow, we talk about the animus, we talk about the father complex, we talk about the mother complex, but there's also entities, the complexes that arise that we are not really sure about who they are. Where did they come from? Is it a sister? Is it a brother? Who is this? Who is this complex, and why do they sit there? They always have something interesting to say. They give you a good idea one day, and then 10 days later, they tell you that the good idea was overblown and you kind of tooted your own horn, and you should feel really bad about it. So where is that voice? What is that voice, and why does it like perk you up and then shoot you down? What is this? But this is regulation, right? This is self-regulation.
Yeah, it really is.
Don't think of yourself so high and mighty and smart. And it keeps us in the middle, keeps us going forward. And when we are not listening to that part of us, we're not regulated, which means that we are on a high horse. We're basically telling people off and telling everybody that we know everything, you know, even though
this may not be a popular message, Dr. Lahab.
what is
The fact that the fact that you've just nailed a relatively large segment of the world's society.
well, nobody wants to name it.
Pardon?
Nobody wants to name it. The complexes want to be named. They want to be identified. They don't like other people saying, oh, this is something else. No, they like to be identified by name. If you're going to talk about them, might as well talk about them. Call them out by name. Don't call them out by somebody else's name. These are eternal creatures, right? They're gods. We call them gods because they're eternal, because this energy has existed through existence. So if you think of all these energy, all these complexes, they actually dream us into life as a character. All these different pieces dream a character that is us. And then if they don't like it, they scrub it away and say, okay, change character, we'll be somebody else. And that's usually when people say, I remade myself. How do you remake yourself? Well, basically, the complexes have said, this is not working. So it rearranges the board. It rearranges it.
Yeah, it does.
It goes from, like, oh, we could have dealt with old stuff, but no, we're new. And, it takes different forms. At first, it's like, oh, putting on a different suit or a dress or makeup or fixing your hair or getting your beard trimmed. But that is external. There's an internal change going on.
They're just luring you in with that.
There's an internal change. Well, if you're going to look like this, you can't say that. If you're walking like this, you can't do that. And so it's like so I'll tell a story. I was with my tailor. He's making me a jacket. I'm a big guy, so he's cutting a jacket that fits me nicely instead of kind of like odd in it. Anyway, so I'm like sitting with the tailor. I'm saying, oh no, I can't do that color. He said, who said? I said, I don't know. That's what I've heard. Usually wear black or blue, right? Like that's kind of like, well, why would I use so much color? He's like, who made up these rules? I said, well, that's interesting. Who did make up these rules?
Good point.
So he made me aware that somebody had been making up rules of the way I dress, and it wasn't me. And it was like, oh, I like loud colors. I like, flowers and stuff. I like purple and yellow and blue and green. And I was like, I didn't know I liked these colors. Who was making up the rules? Who was telling me I could only dress in a certain way? And that complex came back during COVID. Yeah. So I just wear a black t-shirt. It came back during COVID. Before I was breaking away from it. I was kind of like opening up a different jacket. This is like maybe a flower here or something. But I kept thinking that, well, it's not me. But I didn't know who me was. Because I didn't know who that voice was, because I just naturally assumed that I was making decisions. I'm not.
We've had our likes and dislikes very civilized. That's what's we're operating there.
Well, it depends. It's the complex.
Yeah. Well,
the complex is learning, is projecting out and taking in and saying, okay, well, we're going to do this. I'm going to peg you into this box.
Of course, it's complex. Absolutely, it's complex, but these are some of the complexest tactics.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Did you hear them? Did you see them? Did you see how they were dressed? Did you see how they embarrassed themselves? Don't do that.
That's what I was saying. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Don't do that. Don't dress like that. Don't look like that. Don't talk like that. Don't be like that. Be right. It was like, what is that? What does that mean? What does that mean? And for whatever you do, here's the complex. Whatever you do, don't be yourself.
Yes.
Be anybody else, but don't be yourself. It's like, okay. And these are the conflictual voices that drive us crazy, that drive us insane, that drive us out of our mind, that drive us to having a car accident, forgetting something lit,
yelling at our kids,
hitting somebody.
Yeah, yelling at our loved one. Yeah.
Being angry with like a civil servant just because they're there. They're in my way. It doesn't matter. It becomes is this internal strife causes chaos. And because there's chaos internally, my functioning externally, I'm always creating chaos. And you ask them, you say, where's the chaos coming from? And they're like, could I have anything to do with it? That's such a big revelation, Dr. Al-Samarrai. That's such a big revelation. Oh, okay, all right. but you're right. It is a big revelation to them.
And then sometimes we kind of catch it a little bit, and then we say things like, I just need to relax. I'm making way too much out of that than it really is.
The complex tells you to relax after it's run you through a marathon. It's taking you for like 10 runs, and then it comes back and says, yeah, just relax. Why are you making a big deal out of it? I'm not making a big deal out of it. And then you're trying to relax, and the thought won't leave your head. And we say thought, we mean voice. But for our sane friends, we say thoughts, not voices. You can't be listening to voices, but that's what's going on. So what happens is in Jungian vestibular processing is that the energy that's been stored up in these different places that are at war with each other. One is critical of your weight. One is critical of your eyesight. One is critical of your toes. One is telling you your hands are not big enough. You have tiny hands. But each part of you is pulling and jerking you around from a different direction. What does that mean? That means that the ego structure, that part of consciousness, that I, that sees, is being overwhelmed, is disintegrating too quickly. And therefore, other people are taking the job. It's like a banana republic. Or Washington, D.C. Depends. But what happens is somebody loses power, somebody else gains power, and suddenly all you hear is that other voice. But the problem is that those voices are not moving you towards freedom. Those voices are moving you towards more and more isolation and oppression.
Yes.
So the freedom within is the freedom without. I mean, it's kind of like a cliche by now, everybody says it, but that's true. Freedom within, meaning that the free flow of your energy and the understanding of your complexes helps you to move through existence in a easier state.
And it's mind-blowing to me that it's everything you just said, it's all related to our thinking and the way that we feel in our body.
Yeah, it's conflict, it's irritation, it's, we keep saying complexes, but it's an old conflict. It's an old parent who told you were stupid and only said it once, but you heard it like 100 times, 1,000 times. It became a voice in your head. Well, that's not a voice, it's a complex. And that archetypal energy arises in such a formation that it could shift you from left to right, even though you don't want to go left to right. You might want to go right to left. It will walk you down a certain street and you will meet somebody and you'll say, I'm sorry, I bumped into you. And you're like, oh no, you didn't bump into me. I was thinking about this. And you're like, oh my God, I was thinking about that. And it leads you down to meet somebody and talk to somebody. We call this synchronicity. But that's the archetypal energy. That's moving you about like a chess piece. And introducing you to new people all the time. Have you met so-and-so? Have you met so-and-so? You would like so-and-so. And you're like, I don't know who so-and-so is. And suddenly so-and-so appears. That person appears, the person you're thinking of, the person you're dreaming of, the person that you want to fall in love with, the person that's been part of your fantasy, the person that you've been waiting for all your life, suddenly appears. And you're like, oh, that's weird. And they
Can I ask you a question about the serpent?
Yeah, let's talk about the serpent.
It was really interesting to me about why he became a serpent and why he had to get out of the serpent's body, et cetera, et cetera. And I read in another book about Jungian thoughts about what a serpent can represent. And one of the categories that a serpent can represent, and I wrote it down, is the instinctual, the inborn, the feeling of energy and its connections. This is related to survival, to wisdom, to healing, and even to poison and danger. Jung called it the reptilian brain, which refers to that portion of our brain stem and right above that just relates to primitive feeling and thought. And it goes back to the Aborigines that I was referring to earlier, is that they had a very guttural, almost an autonomic nervous system reaction to the spiritual realm. They weren't civilized. They didn't have all this other learning. They didn't have all this technology to take their thinking away from the spiritual realm. they spent a lot of their time trying to figure out the spiritual realm, because that's all they had other than the physical realm that they were living
I
in.
think they were just, I think we've talked about it in different, like, different motifs, but
Okay.
they're closer to nature. And the closer you are to nature, the more you're in touch with creation. The more you've
Yes.
lived in, like, this, we call it civilized. We're not very civilized. We bomb countries into oblivion. We cause
It's all
mass
relative.
disease, but we are technologically advanced. And I think all the technology keeps us from being in touch with creation.
Mm-hmm.
We can't hear the birds. We can't see the plants. We have a buzzing noise always, and we have a phone in our face. So we're not in touch with those energies that are life affirming, that are part of this planet. And so when we go out into a place where you're taking a hike and there's only trees and birds, the first thing you say to yourself is like, oh, this is weird. I feel weird. Yes, of course, because you've been isolated in a world where lights, sounds, a constant rush always is jumping out at you. You're responding to messages, you're responding to email, you're trying to keep everything sorted, and therefore you can't even really have genuine relationships because you're burnt out on responding to everybody, either by phone or by video or by text or by email. It doesn't matter. You're constantly responding, or by Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever. We're all on. But suddenly you can't even have a real relationship, although you're seemingly related to millions of people. You're not really related to anybody. You're not talking to anybody. You're not really having a relationship with anybody. You're not like hanging out with anybody. Yeah. So we see this more and more, and so we become more and more isolated. And the more isolated we are, the farther away we are from these things, and it always freaks us out. It's like, oh, I had a dream. It didn't mean anything. I ate bad pasta. Okay.
Thank you for explaining what I wanted to say. I mean, that was my point. You just
Yeah,
explained it.
no. I was just expanding on it.
You explained it beautifully.
I mean,
Thank you.
expanding on the way we think of the world, the way we see it. It's hard to think of the world and see it when we're constantly being bombarded by the same thing over and over again.
Yes.
You know, it's like, oh, your attention, please. Your attention, please. Your attention, please. Your attention, please. Can I have your attention, please? Okay, and so we're burnt out. So you can't be in touch. It's like then it's like, oh, I don't remember my dreams. Of course you don't remember your dreams. You can't think straight. There are way too many electrical currents running around the house and in your face. You have things buzzing in your head all the time. You don't know if it's a phone. I was watching, I think, a soccer match, and it was like the cruise ships are back that go to Alaska. They're about a half mile away from me, so I could see them. And I think they were like making noises on the deck or something. They were like fixing a horn or something. And I kept thinking it was my phone. And it wasn't my phone. But that's where my consciousness went right away. Okay, but why would it do that? Well, because that means I'm on the phone a lot. That's where my consciousness is. Then when your consciousness is taken from one place to the other, it's fragmented. So to get back to fairy tale, I love this fairy tale. The gods are in this fairy tale. The goddess, the bear, lures him in, and then he eats of the fruit of the dead. And from mythology, we know you eat the fruits of the dead. This is how Persephone was lured in to Hades. And that's why she has to spend, that's why she became ruler of Hades. But as we know from the Greeks, she learned to love it. Well, she was stuck in Hades.
Mhm.
You had to make the best out of a bad situation. Let's put it that way. So you have what you have is a place where there are rules. And as we said earlier, in the dream state, there are rules. And within those rules, the complexes are telling you which way you can resolve your problem. The complexes never want to hold on to your problem. They want to protect you. They want to keep you safe. So they're always giving you advice on to how to move things from left to right and right to left. How to fix things. They lead you to JAMP. They lead you to Jungian advanced motor processing. Sometimes just for fun and sometimes for healing, depending on what method, what mindset they're in. But they're not there to, the complexes are not there to torture you. That is an unfortunate side effect of being a god. Thank you, Eric. Thank you for reading this fairy tale.
I enjoyed it.
And Lisa, any thoughts today? Any comments today?
No, I think I stated my comment. I was curious to see how this evolves, this topic.
I think it's fascinating. I love this topic.
I do too.
I think when we start to actually push ourselves into ghosts and spirits as demons next week, and we move into the realm of the identity of dead spirits with tormenting psychic complexes. So we're going to talk about the torment of the psychic complex. So we know that the complexes are eternal and they're autonomous. We also know that the complexes are there as a protective structure and they arise because of the traumatic events. But when do they become a torture element for us? When do we lose control of that aspect of us and that turns on us in such a way that it becomes torture? And that's what we're going to talk about next week. So fascinating subject. I'm looking forward to it. Any last thoughts, words of wisdom before we say adieu until next week to our listeners?
A lot of great explanations tonight. I really appreciated them.
My takeaway is don't be afraid of yourself.
That's a big one.
And yeah.
That would be a great takeaway for this episode. So I would like to end this episode, and I thought we do an ending where we have affirmations in JAMP that we use. I am amazing. I am bold. I am protected. I am safe. I am wonderful. I am beautiful. I am beauty. I am the sun. I am creation. But I thought we end this episode with a message to people all over the world. And I want this to be a message of hope, a message of resistance, and a message of strength. And I would like to say, for all of us, one of our affirmations that we use quite often is, I am not afraid. And I would like to end our session today by saying, I am not afraid. Eric?
I am not afraid.
Lisa?
I am not afraid.
Thank you very much for being with us at the IFC's Individuation podcast. I see Eric wanted to say something. Eric, go ahead.
No, that's fine. I'm fine.
Go ahead.
No, I'm okay.
Okay. So with that, we'll see you next week.